When I was 8 months pregnant, I found Ethan on a hotel bed. He had taken off the shirt I bought him and was fiercely pressing down on a young, beautiful girl. That day, I stood quietly in the doorway and said only one sentence. "Let's get a divorce." "I won't divorce you." Ethan's urgent voice rang out at the same moment as mine. I received the hotel address my friend sent me, and I didn't set off until a full hour later. The first time I put on the slippers inside the room by mistake and had to go back to change. The second time I left my phone in the entryway and forgot to take it. The third time I, with my belly sticking out, walked back to the sofa and stood there dumbfounded for a few seconds. I only took one tissue. I finally hailed a taxi. All the way there my head was a little dizzy. Yet I kept thinking about only one question. The man who, just last night when my leg cramped, tenderly massaged it for me all through the night. How could he possibly betray me? With that thought in my heart, I stood at the hotel room door. A very familiar male voice came from inside, shattering the self-deception I had been nursing all the way. My raised hand froze in midair, and I couldn't bring myself to knock. I even turned away several times. I was terrified that exposing the ugliness within would unleash consequences that would shatter my life. But just as I was about to leave, I suddenly remembered what Ethan had said on our wedding day. He said, "Avril, if one day I don't love you anymore, throw me far away. Don't let him make you suffer, I'll hurt for it." That day, his earnest, sincere expression was etched deep into my heart. I heard myself laugh as I replied to him. "Fine, if that day ever comes, I definitely won't want you." The sound of the lock turning disturbed the two people on the bed. I stepped forward, my foot crushing the shirt Ethan had just bought. And in that step I crushed our marriage. Watching the man instinctively press the girl beneath him closer into his arms, the words, "Let's get a divorce," slipped out of me as if they'd lost their soul. When he saw it was me, Ethan's reaction was intense. Almost at the same time, his words, "I'm not getting a divorce," drowned out my voice. I stepped past him and glanced at the girl whose face was still buried under the blanket, still beneath Ethan. I didn't know what other women would do when faced with a situation like this with their husbands. But at that moment I had no strength to fight her. To prove with victory the pain this marriage had inflicted on me. Seeing that I continued to ignore him, Ethan hurried off the bed. Compared with before, a trace of composure had crept into his panic. "Avril, what are you doing here?" "We're just working." The thorn lodged in my heart dug in a few inches deeper. I hadn't expected Ethan to be caught by me at the scene, and yet still treat me like a fool and lie. After a few seconds of silence, I took a few steps forward. The girl on the bed trembled continuously with my movements. Just as my hand was about to clutch the sheet over her head, Ethan suddenly dropped to his knees before me. "Avril, I was wrong. Forgive me this time, just this once." There was pain on the man's face, as if he truly knew he had erred. But if he were truly remorseful, he wouldn't have risked deceiving me just now on a hope. I pulled my hand away from his and stared only at his eyes. "Ethan, tell me, how many times is this?" The man's gaze went vacant for a moment. He still tried to struggle. 3, 4 times. He couldn't say more, because he hadn't been able to keep count. I laughed. Laughing at myself for having trusted him too much, laughing at myself for realizing it far too late. The baby in my belly would be 8 months in a few days. I couldn't terminate it. I stood for a long time, my whole body heavy and aching. Actually, there were more questions I wanted to ask. How long has this been going on? Had it started before I became pregnant? Or did he fail to resist temptation during my pregnancy? Ethan was still kneeling on the floor, hurriedly explaining himself to me. "Avril, I swear to you, it was only 3 months with her. Before that, my body and soul belonged entirely to you." I stared into the man's bloodshot eyes as if pronouncing his death sentence. But that makes it all the more unforgivable. He had ignored the hardship I endured carrying his child, and had completely extinguished my hope for this marriage. It also steeled my resolve. "Ethan, I'll have the divorce papers prepared by my lawyer. You should find a lawyer too and get ready." Ethan rushed out anxiously from behind, realizing he wasn't wearing any clothes. He had to stop. "Avril, I won't divorce you, I'd rather die than divorce you." Along with the angry roar, I heard a girl timidly ask, "Mr. Ethan, has the madam left? Can I come out now?" That voice, I felt like I'd heard it somewhere before. On the way back, I cried all the way in the taxi. Every part of me was screaming with heart-wrenching pain. The driver was a woman, and she saw my condition at a glance. "Your husband cheated, didn't he?" She glanced at my belly and sighed. "I've seen plenty like you." Just the other day there was a woman, already over 40, insisting on having a son for her man. As soon as the baby was born, her husband wanted a divorce. The child couldn't be taken, the assets were divided, and the other woman brought her 3 daughters into the house and literally threw her out. She wanted to tell me, "There are many women in the world betrayed by their husbands, just like me. Even if you cry yourself to death, life still has to go on, doesn't it?" I stopped crying and looked out the window. "I'm ready. I'm getting a divorce." Catching the inquisitive gaze in the rearview mirror, the driver chuckled softly. "You're more decisive than most women I've met. I hope you can keep that resolve when your husband comes begging you for forgiveness on his knees." I knew what she meant. Many women in life stay for the children, for their parents, or for something they hold dear. When faced with such situations, they choose to endure and endure again, until they're driven to the brink of collapse and madness, and only then dare to let everything go. It was like my mother back then, who endured my father's affairs for 10 years so that the young me wouldn't be bullied by a stepmother. I saw with my own eyes how she changed, from a radiant, glamorous girl into a resentful woman who could fly into a rage over the smallest domestic triviality. The car soon pulled up at an upscale villa. Ethan leaned against the door, chain-smoking. On the same route he'd cut the travel time in half to get there ahead of me. When he saw me return, Ethan tossed away his cigarette, politely opened the car door for me, and paid the fare. It was as if everything I had just seen had never happened. The driver lady handed the fare back the same way she had received it. The clink of change being accounted for made the man look up, puzzled. I seized the gap, avoided the hand he reached out, and stepped out of the car. I find the money of a man who cheats during his wife's pregnancy dirty. Ethan's face immediately went dark, I couldn't help snorting with laughter. The oppressive anger I'd been holding in loosened considerably. I even thought, isn't it just divorcing the man? The world is never short of men. The driver lady gave me a mischievous wink, pressed the gas, and drove off. Back home. Ethan bent to set my slippers in place and handed me a hot towel to dry my hands. Then he immediately and tirelessly ran to the kitchen to cook for me himself. The maid had been sent out by him, her face full of envy. "Madam, men like Sir, who love their wives and take care of the household, are really rare." I was silent. Until today, I had thought the same. That evening, after instructing my lawyer to prepare the divorce papers, I drove Ethan out to the guest room. The man moved his lips. When he saw the disdain on my face, his body involuntarily trembled. He slipped out of the room silently. Late at night, my swollen legs began cramping incessantly again. Muffled groans of pain escaped my mouth, magnified in the darkness. The next second the door slammed open and Ethan rushed in. He gathered my legs and, as he did every night, gently massaged them. He worked until the pain had completely vanished, then his lowered head burst forth great, heavy tears that fell onto my legs, cold to the touch. His voice hoarse, he said, "Avril, can we not get a divorce? Please?" His choking sobs turned into a cathartic, all-out cry. Ethan collapsed onto me, letting down every guard, sobbing like a child. For a very, very long time. I tilted my head back slightly and stared at the chandelier overhead. If I said just one sentence, "Okay, I forgive you," our life would snap back to the way it was when we were happy. If I would only loosen my grip, if I would only let myself be wronged once. If only, but I knew I couldn't. I sniffed, then drove Ethan out of the room. I hadn't slept all night. At dawn I had just dozed off for a moment when a clamor woke me. Ethan's sister Yvette came clattering up the stairs in high heels. When she saw her brother sleeping on the floor outside my door, she burst in as soon as she opened it. "Avril, you filthy woman, how dare you make my brother sleep on the floor?" She ignored the child in my belly and grabbed my arm, trying to pull me off the bed. She yanked me so hard I staggered and nearly fell. A petite girl caught me just in time. My heavy body pressed down on the girl's back, drawing a muffled gasp from her. "Thank you." I hurriedly got up and looked at the girl who Yvette often brought to our house with gratitude. The girl seemed a little afraid of me and kept lowering her head and waving her hands. Even though I've been Yvette's sister-in-law for 5 years, she still shows me not an ounce of respect. "Don't think that just because you're carrying my brother's child, you're the boss in our Pei family. My parents dote on you, but I won't." She has always resented how kindly my in-laws treat me. Every time we meet she has to sneer a few lines. Those words barely sting, I've almost gotten used to them. But just as I was about to leave, I heard her add, "Avril, my brother must have someone on the side. Once you give birth and turn into an old hag who loses his favor, let's see how you can still hold your head high in front of me." She raised an eyebrow at the girl beside her and gave an ambiguous smile. I finally looked back and said coolly, "So, you knew Ethan cheated too?" Yvette's face grew even more smug, her chin lifted high. "You, a burden who wouldn't even keep your own biological father, still expect my brother to stay with just you? Humph, dream on." Before, I only thought Yvette was acting out of petty jealousy like a young girl, so I never bothered to take her seriously. But even a stranger, upon seeing a woman betrayed by her husband during pregnancy, couldn't possibly be this gleeful. Yvette glared at me, grabbed the girl and went to the drawer where I kept my jewelry. She rifled through it as if she knew exactly where everything was, necklaces and bracelets worth millions. After she'd wrapped a necklace worth tens of millions of yuan around her own neck, she spent a long time picking from the rest. Finally she slipped a diamond ring onto the girl's ring finger. She waved the girl's hand at me, as if to show off. "Hannah, this is my sister-in-law's wedding ring, it matches my brother's. It suits you best. Maybe pregnancy really does make you stupid for 3 years." In that moment, I still hadn't caught the other meaning behind Yvette's words. In the past, whenever I had a new luxury piece of jewelry or a new handbag, Yvette would always be the first to come into my room and rummage through it openly. Many of the things she took had never even been used by me once. I kept thinking we were all family, not giving things away to outsiders. Always indulgent. But now, I'm divorcing Ethan. I won't be the fool for nothing anymore. As for that wedding ring, if she wants it, she can take it. I ignored the provocation in Yvette's eyes and snatched all the items from her hand. Then I turned and picked a bracelet worth millions out of the box. To the girl who looked a little shy I said, "This is for you. It's new, I never wore it. Thank you for catching me earlier." The girl stumbled back in panic, she really seemed afraid of me. "Madam, no, I can't, this is far too valuable. I don't force people." I was about to put the bracelet down when the girl hesitated and spoke. "Madam, could you give me that ring? I really like it." I paused, then nodded. But before the girl could put it away, Ethan, who had suddenly appeared in the doorway, grabbed it. "Avril, that's our wedding ring, how can you give it to someone else?" His voice sounded squeezed out of his throat, dry and rough. I looked at the girl, whose face had gone pale, and reassured her, "It's okay, he's not blaming you. You two go ahead and leave first." Yvette was still very afraid of her brother Ethan, and she ran out ahead. The girl, whether startled or for some other reason, moved hesitantly, walking slowly and glancing back with every step. At last, only the two of us remained in the room. "Ethan, I'm not joking about divorcing you." The man's eyes were red. "I know you're angry now, but can't you give me one chance?" "I promise." "No." I cut him off, leaving no room. Ethan panted, glaring at me with hatred. "Avril, even if your father had so many women outside, didn't your mother still give him 10 years? You really aren't like your mother, your heart is too cruel." In that moment, the thorn lodged in my heart was driven all the way in. It hurt through and through. I had never known Ethan could wound so fiercely. The man realized he'd said the wrong thing, his outstretched hand trembling mid-air. I tilted my head, tears streaming down my cheeks. "So, Ethan, if I forgive you this time, will you turn out just like my dad?" Before he could answer, I declared with unwavering certainty, "You will." Ethan didn't show up all afternoon. He didn't even eat dinner. Yvette's eyes darted around the table as she eyed me suspiciously. Just as I set down my chopsticks and prepared to head upstairs, she finally spoke up. "Aren't you at all curious what my brother went to do?" I didn't stop, I kept walking. Yvette grew anxious, she called from behind me, "Avril, even if my brother is in this house, secretly seeing another woman, you don't care?" A dim, gloomy basement entrance, a faint light slipped through the crack of the door. It fell at my feet. In the quiet space, muffled voices crept into my ears. "Hannah, who told you to show up here? Are you looking to die?" The man squeezed the girl's delicate throat, his exhaled hot breath all spraying across her face. He didn't release his grip until her face began to bruise purple, then Ethan finally let go. "Here's the money I promised you, get out of here." Ignoring the pain in her body, the girl clung to the man's waist. She cried and pleaded, her voice breaking. "Mr. Ethan, you said you kind of liked me. I won't fight your wife for anything, I only beg you to keep me by your side. You said pregnant women get fat and deformed, their tempers worsen, and you have no interest in them at all? I can satisfy that for you." The girl sounded like a kitten, her voice soft and weak. It made you want to pity her. Ethan didn't push her away this time, he simply let his hands fall limply. "Avril is the only woman I have ever loved. Even if our bodies no longer fit, she is the wife I accepted long ago in my life. I can't reciprocate your love for me, consider it my debt to you. Go." Yvette tugged my arm excitedly, indicating I should rush in. So the woman Ethan cheated with was this girl. I should have seen it sooner. I didn't go in to disturb the two of them, instead I turned slightly aside and looked at Yvette, who was waiting to watch the show. "You went to all that trouble to get a woman for Ethan, do you really not want me to be with your brother?" Perhaps my expression was too earnest, because Yvette suppressed the faint excitement that had been rising from deep within her. She waved her hand and gave an impatient eye roll. "Avril, other than being prettier, how could your family background and connections possibly compare to my brother's?" It seems she didn't know. "Do your parents know what you've been doing?" A flash of intense jealousy crossed Yvette's face. "Don't think that by cozying up to my parents they'll take your side in this matter. They may favor you and punish me, but in front of my brother they would never choose to stand with you. If you don't want a divorce, then learn to endure it for the rest of your life." Yvette had always assumed his parents went out of their way to please me and protect me. Because I was Ethan's wife, the daughter-in-law of the Pay family. Ridiculous, how utterly ridiculous. Without lasting interests, how can the current situation be sustained for long? The day I married into the Pay family, I invested $100 million as my dowry into the Pay company. During the marriage, because the Pay family's cash flow was often tight, I intermittently put in nearly $300 million to support the projects Ethan advocated for. Now I hold 40% of Pay's shares. I am one of the company's major shareholders. Actually, Ethan was a little wrong. In the 10 years my mother endured my father, she wasn't idle. Under the guise of being a wife, she secured for her daughter a fortune large enough to last several lifetimes. Facing Yvette's mocking gaze, I slowly let a smile appear. If she wanted me to leave the Pay family so badly, then so be it, just as she wished. I will take what belongs to me and leave with it. The sound of my conversation with Yvette startled the two people behind the door. Ethan stepped out first. The girl, Hannah, clung to his shirt, only her head visible. They stood extremely close to each other, yet Ethan didn't notice at all. It was a habit that took time to form. Seeing me, the man panicked, his voice was full of helplessness. "Avril, let me explain. His explanation amounted to nothing more than that today he had come to settle things with Hannah. I couldn't be bothered to listen. Ethan, we're getting divorced soon, and I don't care about your rotten affairs, but please control your sister. Don't keep testing my limits over and over. I will get a divorce. I glanced at Ethan, whose face had gone pale, then turned and walked away. A few minutes later, Yvette ran out of the basement crying, a red handprint on her cheek. That night, Richard and Margaret Pay came over. The moment Margaret saw me, she burst into pained sobs. Avril, your mother supports your divorce. Even though Ethan is my son, if he dares to do something that hurts you, I will never forgive him. I was somewhat moved. Over the years, setting aside material interests, Margaret treated me almost no differently than her own daughter. Whenever Yvette took valuable things from me, Margaret would always worry that I'd be hurt. She would harshly scold Yvette right in front of me. Otherwise, she wouldn't have allowed Yvette to hate me so much. Richard shook his sleeve and scolded Margaret. Don't make a fuss. Avril's about to give birth, how can you be telling them to split up? Margaret grasped my hand and retorted, even if my eldest grandson is born into a broken home, I won't let Avril be wronged. At worst, once Ethan remarries, I'll raise my eldest grandson myself. Even if he's lost his mother and father, he has grandparents, we can always bring him up. Margaret's words made me feel a little uncomfortable. I slowly withdrew my hand. I will not give the child I carried for 10 months to Ethan to raise. Realizing I might be angry, Margaret reached out and took my hand again. She smiled awkwardly, I found myself softening. I didn't pull away. I let them stay for dinner, and Ethan went out to see them off. When he returned, I was still sitting at the table. A divorce agreement lay in front of me. Ethan pulled out a chair, sat down, and wiped his face. Isn't there any room for reconciliation? I said nothing. The man gave a rueful little smile. Fine, I'll sign. He didn't look at the contents, he was about to raise his hand to sign. I reminded him once. The child will be mine. Avril, that's my child, his surname is Pay. Ethan suddenly lifted his eyes, and I could clearly see 3 red veins in them. I said the child will be mine, and he'll bear the surname Ning. I can leave with nothing, I can never marry again. The man, as if struck by some thought, kept confirming with me. Afterwards, I had the lawyer draw up a new divorce agreement. This time, he signed. But Ethan had one condition. He said we had to wait until the baby was born before we could file for divorce. I agreed. From that day on, although Ethan and I still lived under the same roof, we began to live 2 separate lives. I don't know if he had said something to his parents, but they never came again. Finally, the day I went into labor arrived, and Ethan wasn't home. The ambulance we called didn't show up for a long time. The housekeeper was frantic, and in the end it was my mother, who had just happened to return from abroad, who drove me to the hospital. Later I learned that that day, Hannah had fainted at my doorstep. Ethan thought the ambulance had been called by the driver, so he carried the girl into the vehicle. When she woke up, the Pay family was all standing outside the ward. Ethan was even kneeling in the corridor, refusing to get up. Bah, I used to think he was a good man, but turns out he's just like your philanderer of a father. My mother was full of regret, after all, Ethan had passed through her rigorous screening. I gave birth to a son. Small, red, his skin wrinkled. Not at all pretty. But his arrival seemed to stitch up every wound in my heart. After seeing our son, I told my mother to let the Pays in. Ethan's legs wobbled from kneeling so long. Yet he was still the first to rush up to me. Avril, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were in labor. If I had known, even 100, 1,000, 10,000 Hannahs couldn't compare to you. In the past, Ethan would have tugged at some part of my heart. But now, I found that I was astonishingly calm inside. I cut off his confession. Ethan, I don't want to hear you speak. Can you let me say something first? A flicker of hurt passed through the man's eyes. I didn't look at him. Facing the Pay family, I said, when I'm discharged, I'll divorce Ethan. From then on, this child will have no relation to the Pay family. No. Margaret was the first to stand up in opposition. Her face now showed none of her former benevolence. My mother and Margaret confronted each other and discussed many conditions. In the end, Richard spoke. You can keep the child, but you must give up all your shares in Pay Corporation in exchange. I thought for a moment and put forward a condition of my own. I can hand everything over, but you must return the 100 million dowry you originally gave me, otherwise I'll sell to your competitors. Richard gritted his teeth and went back to raise the money. Ethan kept his head down the whole time, saying nothing. He had fully realized there was no turning back for our marriage. After Mr. and Mrs. Pay left, Yvette helped Hannah, who was clutching her lower belly, walk in. At a glance I could tell she was pregnant. Finally rid of someone she found detestable, Yvette looked radiant. Avril, you're not the only one who can give the Pay family a child. Hannah is already pregnant, with my brothers. My mother wanted to drive them all out, but I stopped her. I watched Hannah walk to Ethan's side, as if to stake her claim. No longer the furtive, guilty posture of a mistress. Miss Avril, a divorced woman, would still do well to keep some distance from Mr. Ethan. The girl looked smug, as if without me she could immediately marry Ethan. Miss Hannah rose up during my pregnancy. Aren't you afraid that when you get pregnant, Ethan will go find a woman even more capable than you? Better worry about yourself. After all, if I lose a man, I still have money. What does Miss Hannah have? Then I turned and looked at Yvette, who was watching the commotion. I heard the Pay family is discussing the wedding date between you and the Gu family's second son? Yvette lifted her chin high. This engagement was her greatest pride. If I were you, I'd hurry up and marry him. Who knew if, once the Pay family was gone, she would still be able to marry in. Yvette never believed a word I said. She was about to curse me when Ethan, who had been silent the whole time, grabbed her and dragged her out. Don't worry, he said, I won't let them bother you again. After the postpartum confinement, I handed our son over to my mother. I got into Ethan's car and we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. We didn't speak the whole way. It wasn't until we came out of the bureau that Ethan finally broke the silence. Avril, can I visit our son often? I faced away from him. It's better if you don't. I don't want my son to have a father who cheated. If you truly care about him, don't call yourself his father in this life. Richard raised the money, and I transferred all the shares I held into his name. In return, I obtained a legally binding letter severing our ties. While my mom was helping me take care of the kids, she kept lamenting the Pay family's 300 million on my behalf. That was what I wrested from your father and his illegitimate son, and I just handed it over to the Pays for nothing. No wonder I didn't see through that Ethan kid sooner. That whole family is rotten through and through, hypocrites who only care about profit. Since my mom divorced my dad, she'd gone back to being her old lively, nagging self. I still remember the years she raised me. My dad's women kept turning up to bother us, even though Mom had lost whatever feeling she once had for him. But I think she would have been upset too. Otherwise she wouldn't have been so touchy during that period, ready to flare up at the slightest thing. I gave a faint, slight smile and soothed my mother. Don't be heartbroken. Getting this 100 million is already good, otherwise we'd have lost everything. My mother looked puzzled, and I told her everything I knew. The night the Pay family parents came to persuade me, I had already thought about selling off my shares. But I approached several branches of the Pay conglomerate, and they all avoided me. Later, a friend used her contacts to dig up some information. The Pay family had a very large project that had run into serious problems. It was overseen by Richard's half-brother, who had used certain methods to hide it from Richard and his family. Right now second Uncle Pay is frantically moving assets. The money my parents raised by selling their house and jewelry has all been given to me. I'm afraid they'll regret it later. After Ethan and I picked up the divorce certificate, he started appearing under my building a lot. Knowing I wouldn't let him see the kids, he didn't harass me. He just sat quietly in his car, window down, chain-smoking through the night. It didn't affect us directly, but after a while it became uncomfortable to watch. My mother, soft-hearted, has begun to waver and suggested, "Avril, why don't you let him come in to see the children just once?" I absolutely refuse. Once there's a first time, there will be a second, and countless more. That day I slipped on a coat and went downstairs. Seeing me come out, the man hurriedly pinched out the cigarette glowing at his fingertips. He got out of the car, carrying a look of some delight. Lately Ethan hasn't been doing well, he especially smells strongly of smoke. I took a few steps back and frowned. "Stay away from me, you smell." Without looking to see his expression, I continued, "Ethan, whether this is a ploy of yours to win sympathy or you truly feel regret, I want you to stop appearing." Perhaps stung by my words, a trace of desolation appeared on the man's face. "Avril, I don't want to come either, but I can't sleep." After saying that, he took another cigarette from the car and lit it. He drew a hard drag. The sputtering flame danced at his fingertip, making him feel even more distant to me. Only after he finished the entire cigarette did Ethan speak. "Fine, I promise you, I won't come anymore." Ethan was the sort of man who kept his word. Since he'd made that promise, I nodded and walked up the stairs, my face expressionless. After that day, Ethan truly never showed up again. But even if he wanted to back out, it was probably too late. Second Uncle Pay's whole family fled abroad. The mess they left behind was entirely dumped on the unprepared Pay relatives. When Richard found out, he fainted on the spot. The whole company now depended solely on Ethan to keep running. But they realized it too late, the senior executives had almost all secured escape routes. One after another, they submitted their resignations. While Ethan was frantically overwhelmed with work, Hannah came to the door demanding money, with the child in her womb. It turned out Hannah was not Yvette's so-called classmate at all. Yvette had picked her up from a bar. Yvette's friend was Hannah's ex-boyfriend, and she heard them joking about it. Hannah may not be much to look at, but she's skilled in bed. If it weren't that the girlfriends I date never last more than a month, I'd honestly be a little reluctant to let her go. Hearing that, Yvette got the idea of finding a woman for her brother Ethan. After arranging it with Hannah, Yvette began bringing her into my house under the pretense of being a classmate. Sometimes she would stay at my place for a few days. With that coming and going, she inevitably ran into Ethan. When Hannah went to the company to find Ethan, Yvette happened to be there too. Annoyed, Yvette started a quarrel with her. "It's just a piece of trash, who knows whether the baby in your belly is my brother's? Why should I give you money?" Hannah knew Pay's company was on the brink. If she didn't take the money now, she never would later. She gave up on holding back and didn't show any weakness. "Whether it's your brother's? Aren't you the one who's not clear about that? You were the one who asked me to seduce your brother. Every time afterward, weren't you the one staring at my belly?" "Heh, I've been around long enough to know. I've never seen a younger sister set her married older brother up with a woman and drive her own sister-in-law away." Glancing at Ethan's darkening face, Yvette panicked. She couldn't let Hannah keep talking. The two of them wrestled, and soon there was blood. Hannah's child was lost like that, by accident. Immediately after, Yvette's fiancé's family came to return the engagement. That last lifeline for Yvette was gone too. She stayed home crying and making a scene all day, demanding that Ethan restore the marriage. Ethan shrugged off her hand, his expression unreadable. "This is the retribution for you tearing my family apart, the retribution." Mr. and Mrs. Pay didn't know the truth. After hearing that, Richard struck Yvette hard across the face. It was the first time he'd hit her. "Idiot, a complete idiot. Do you think we've been favoring her? We're after the money in her hands." Margaret looked at her daughter with disappointment. "Yvette, when have you ever returned anything you took from Avril? If I placate her a little and you offer a half-hearted apology, won't all her good things end up with you? Look at the jewelry and bags in your room. I spent most of my life saving and still don't have as much as you." Yvette felt a rare bewilderment. The favoritism she had always believed in turned out to be false. As she drifted, Ethan smiled foolishly. Ridiculous, the happy marriage he fancied was actually sustained by dividing Avril's wealth. The harmony he thought he had with his in-laws was likewise laced with scheming and disgrace. That day, ignoring his mother's and sister's cries, Ethan returned every last thing he had taken from me back to me. Avril, I'm sorry. For all these years being married to me, for the wrongs you've endured. Although I had already taken my revenge on Yvette, I still accepted it. I plan to donate it to charity later. That's right, I was the one who ruined Yvette's marriage. The Gu family has a strict, upright household, and would not have withdrawn from the engagement just because the Pei family had fallen on hard times. It was I who went to them and told them what Yvette had done to me. A daughter-in-law with warped values, stirring up trouble. Naturally, the Gu family would no longer want her. On the day of my son's 100-day banquet, the Pei clan finally couldn't withstand this crisis. They declared bankruptcy. Their property was seized, and the four of them squeezed into a small rented room of only a few dozen square meters. As the ringleader, Yvette bore the brunt of resentment and blame. A rich young miss who had been spoiled and raised with a fragile heart. Driven mad by her own parents after they deprived her of the comfortable material life she'd known. Every day, whenever her family wasn't paying attention, she would run out to the street dazed and foolish, giggling and laughing. One night, she suddenly came downstairs to my building. She shouted from below, "Sister-in-law, I'm Yvette. Will you come home with me? My brother is still waiting for you at home." I didn't go downstairs, I just contacted Ethan and told him to take her back. Ethan must have been out looking for her, because he arrived quickly. I stood by the window and watched Ethan forcefully hoist his sister onto his back. Before leaving, I looked up toward the window one last time. Later, I kept running into many old acquaintances here, and the Pei family came to rely on Ethan as the only breadwinner. They could only move back to their ancestral home. When my son was 3, I was on the way to drop him off at kindergarten. I ran into the driver woman from back then again. Her car was parked at the curb, there were no passengers, only a girl who looked like a middle schooler sitting inside. The car was piled high with furniture and luggage. The woman recognized me too and pulled a smile tinged with bitterness. I got divorced as well. I didn't ask her what had happened. I just booked a room for the mother and daughter at a hotel and left my contact information when I left. "Ma'am, I want to hire a driver to take my son to and from school. If you're willing, you'd only be responsible for the pickups and drop-offs each day, the rest of the time you can use as you please." That day, I paid the driver 3 times the normal wage. With a bewildered look in her eyes, she squeezed my hand and I smiled. "This is for the car fare."